Hey everybody, what's going on? I am Greg Sussman, joined today by Jim Sannes of FanDuel, who's here to break down Week 16 from a DFS perspective. What's happening, Jim?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting slate going on here, Greg, because we've got a couple of games that mean quite a bit, but most of those games are not on the main slate. So we're kind of trying to dig here to try to find teams with motivation to try to win in Week 16, which is not the easiest task by any means, but still I think some pretty fun plays on the board. So I'm all right. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. We got championships to play for. We got a lot of money to play for this weekend, and I need your help. So let's break it down. Let's begin with a team that has everything to play for. It's a playoff game this week between Dallas and Philly. And you, not surprisingly, are in on Dak Prescott and pairing him up with Michael Gallup. A struggle last week for Michael Gallup, but facing the Philly secondary, no one loses to the Philly secondary. Philly, indeed. Dak Prescott. Michael Gallup, your first stack this week.
Yeah, right before we started recording, there was a report that apparently Dak Prescott has a messed up shoulder. So keep an eye on that throughout this week. If he's able to get into full practice on Friday, I think it is full steam ahead with this stack because he apparently played through that shoulder injury the entire second half on Sunday and didn't look that bad. So right now, I feel pretty good about Dak, but it's worth keeping an eye on as the week goes along. And this is a team, like you said, that has a lot on the line. They're facing the Philadelphia Eagles, and that secondary has gotten torched pretty much all year long. Now, the question here is, do you go with Michael Gallup or do you go Amari Cooper? And I love Amari Cooper. He is an amazing talent. I think he's in a very good spot this week as well. But Michael Gallup is cheaper. He is $6,500. He leads the team in targets and air yards since their bye week. And he's $6,500 against this Eagles defense. So if I'm rolling out multiple tournament lineups with Dak Prescott, I am going to make sure I get some Amari Cooper because Cooper always, I think, among all the receivers in the slate, is going to be among the top guys from an upside perspective. Michael Gallup is a little bit cheaper. He is $6,500, helps offset the salary of Dak Prescott at least a little bit, and I think that's pretty attractive. Dak is $8,000. I want my quarterbacks to be in games where there's something on the line. That is the case with Dak here. So I think that it makes a lot of sense to pair these two together in a game where they desperately need a win. Again, keep an eye on the injury report throughout this week. Make sure that Dak's shoulder is okay, but if it is, I think that he is arguably one of the best quarterbacks on this slate, and I want to pair him most often with Michael Gallup.
Absolutely. As long as Dak Prescott's shoulder is okay, pairing with Michael Gallup, one of his favorite receivers, obviously all season long, makes plenty of sense against a beat-up and brutal Eagles secondary. Good spot here on Sunday for Dallas to get the job done. Up next, we go to Seattle, who is also playing for something here this week, trying to get that number one overall seed potentially in the NFC. Chris Carson, the Seattle defense, has been one of your favorite pairings this season. How come you're going back to the well against Arizona?
Yeah, I definitely think you can go with the Seahawks passing game here if you expect Kyler Murray to put points on the board, which he could because he's been good against some good defense this year, specifically San Francisco, and Seattle is a step below that. So there is a path to using the Seahawks passing offense, but there is a lot of safety in this Seahawks rushing offense because we know what they want to do. They want to run the football, and they should be able to on Sunday. They are double-digit favorites. The Cardinals are a bottom 10 team against the rush this year based on number fires metrics, so they're ranked 20th there. So a bottom 12 team. That means they should be able to run the ball efficiently. And Chris Carson with no Rashad Penny is basically a different player. Last week, 76% of the snaps, he had 24 carries along with 2 targets. And that workload goes up for Chris Carson whenever there is no Rashad Penny, who will obviously not be playing this weekend. He is $8,200. I think that when you bake in the fact that Rashad Penny will not play, that's a very palatable salary for Chris Carson. The Seahawks defense is $4,400, and like I said, they haven't been great this year. They're ranked 14th against the pass, 13th overall based on number fires metrics. They've been very average, and they have a lot of injuries right now. But what we get here is them as 10-point favorites against a team that wants to throw the football. And Kyler Murray, I think his biggest fault this year as a quarterback has been a willingness to accept sacks behind a bad offensive line. So I think the upside for the Seahawks defense is there. They've got a pretty good floor as well. And if they do well, Chris Carson should do well also. So a good correlation here between Chris Carson and his defense, and I think this is the safest way for getting exposure to the Seahawks team.
For Arizona, the question becomes, can they put points on the board? Russell Wilson is in a fantastic matchup here this week against the secondary for Arizona that hasn't been good either. But if you don't think Arizona can hang in the game, we once again go back to Seattle's defense, and we go back to Chris Carson. Rashad Penny is out, which means Carson's going to do what he does. He's 20 carries at least, 100 yards at least, 1 touchdown at least. Chris Carson set to dominate once again against Arizona on Sunday. Our next stack, Jim, brings us to the Miami Dolphins, a team that's played hard despite their record this year. We went to them last week, of course, against the New York Giants. Didn't work out all too well, but now facing Cincinnati, it's Fitzpatrick, and you're pairing him with your boy, a guy that's made a lot of money here over the last couple of weeks. It's Devante Parker. He's extended the contract, he's gotten paid, and now let's see if he can get us paid this weekend.
Yeah, he came back into a really good role last week. He was coming off that concussion. We didn't know early in the week if he was going to play, but he did play, and he played really well in that game with 7 targets, and a lot of those targets were downfield. Ryan Fitzpatrick is very happy to feed his guys downfield, and he's been feeding Devante Parker consistently since Preston Williams got hurt. If you exclude that game where Devante Parker left early with the concussion, in the game since Preston Williams' injury, Parker has 25% of the overall targets, which is very good. But he also has 50% of the deep targets, which is just a massive number, especially for a guy on a team where they will throw deep and who has been good from a production perspective this year. And he's been pulling in those deep targets as well. And Parker, because I don't think many people used him coming off that concussion, his salary has come back down to $6,900. That is a really good number for someone who has been as good as he has been this year and is getting the usage that Parker has gotten. Ryan Fitzpatrick, $7,400. He is kind of expensive, given that there are other more viable quarterbacks who are not that far apart. But to Fitzpatrick's credit, he's been very good recently. He has at least 30 rushing yards in 3 of the past 4 games, and we've seen him, chuck it deep, and that is good for a quarterback as well. So I have a little bit of concern here, given the Bengals defense has showed some life recently, and we'll talk more about that in the next stack, but I still think that it's justifiable to go at the Dolphins in tournaments. I think that Parker is a cash game option. I don't think Fitzpatrick is, but I think that both these guys are options for cash games. This game features, 2 defenses that are certainly not great, even though the Bengals have been improving, and it could shoot out. We've seen both these teams at least trying of late. So I am very okay with going at the Dolphins as long as it is not in a cash game setting, because again, the Bengals defense has been a little bit more kicky recently, so I am okay with avoiding them in cash games. But for tournaments, I think that Fitzpatrick and Parker do make a lot of sense.
Devontae Parker did step back into that monster role as Ryan Fitzpatrick's number 1 wide receiver. He's shown how talented he truly is this year all season long with Miami. Ryan Fitzpatrick will go to his favorite wide receiver repetitively, or we hope, on Sunday. So it's a good stack in a game where neither defense is really good, which is why we also want to go to Cincinnati, and in particular, Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon has actually been really good over the past month. And we know the offensive line struggles. We know that Cincinnati's rarely in games. But their defense, they've also kind of stepped up. I'm not saying they're good, but they've stepped up enough that Joe Mixon's been able to really help us fantasy owners. But you also like their defense here. Well, you like Ryan Fitzpatrick and Devante Parker and the Bengals defense. How does that work?
That is the nature of Ryan Fitzpatrick. He can give it and he can take it away in a hurry. And this Bengals defense, as we alluded to before, has been kind of interesting recently. I've had a lot of players facing them in DFS, Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, and a lot of those guys have underperformed. Over the past 5 games, this defense has allowed 17, 16, 6, 21, and 28 points over their past 5 games. So from a point perspective, they've been good. Now, they faced a lot of bad offenses in that time, but Ryan Fitzpatrick can occasionally turn into a pumpkin as well. So I think that it's still worth noting that they've been pretty good, and they are $3,800 against a quarterback who will occasionally turn the ball over. So I think that's why the Bengals defense is in play, even while saying that I could also be okay with the Miami Dolphins offense. Joe Mixon shouldn't be as hard of a sell. He is $7,800, but his snap rate spiked back in week 10 when they turned things over to Ryan Finley. And since that time, Mixon has been awesome. He has averaged 21.7 carries and 2.8 targets per game. His efficiency has increased since Cordy Glenn came back for this team back in week 12. It's a 4-game sample. Mixon has actually been a very good rusher in those 4 games, and he's gotten massive volume. When you put that up against a Dolphins defense that has been terrible all year long, their offense has been good, but the defense has definitely not taken a step forward. I think that that's really interesting. Joe Mixon is a cash game play at $7,800. I don't think this defense is, because they are on the road. I believe that they're slight underdogs. I think they were a 1-point dog last time I looked, and that's not what we want from a defense. But there is a path to a good game from this defense, so I like them for tournaments, and I like Mixon for tournaments, but I think he is also very much in play for cash games as well.
In cash games, Mixon should get the job done, but like you said, with the Bengals defense, Ryan Fitzpatrick giveth and taketh. It's basically Jameis Winston before he was Jameis Winston. Ryan Fitzpatrick's been doing this a long time. You know what you're getting from Ryan Fitzpatrick? A gunslinging, wheeling-dealing son of a gun. That is Ryan Fitzpatrick, and that's why we like him in DFS and the Bengals defense as well. Up next, we go to Atlanta and Devonta Freeman paired with the Falcons defense. Falcons are in a good spot, and if you think they're going to dominate, well, you put Devonta Freeman in there, you go to the Falcons defense, just like we're doing with Cincinnati, just like we're doing with Seattle here, Jim.
Yeah, they really are in a good spot. As you mentioned, it's actually been getting better too, because this game opened with a 6.5 point spread. It is now at 7 points on FanDuel Sportsbook. And I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that's wrong by any means. This Falcons team, despite being out of the playoff hunt, has played hard recently. And this Jaguars team, outside of that late stretch against Oakland, really has not. So I think it makes sense that they are heavy favorites here. And that bodes well for Devonta Freeman. And Devonta Freeman did not do much in that game against San Francisco. So this is kind of gone overlooked. But he did get a role change in week number 15. In that game, Devonta Freeman played 79% of the snaps. That was his second highest mark of the entire season. If we look at Devonta Freeman since coming back from his ankle injury, or from his injury, his foot injury, he's averaged 15.3 carries and 4.0 targets per game. His snap rate has been at least 66.7% in all of those games as well. And that's good when he's $6,200 at home as a 7-point favorite against a defense that has kind of given up hope. They rank 30th against the rush right now based on number fire schedule adjusted metrics. So great matchup at home, pretty big favorite, not a bad roll. I kind of think Devonta Freeman makes a lot of sense. And if Devonta Freeman does well, this defense should do well also. They've had some blips on the radar, but I think overall they've definitely carried over most of the gains that they made coming out of their bye with that change in the play callers on the defensive side of things. They've still been pretty good, as we saw against that 49ers offense. So I think even though the Falcons are $4,400, I am still interested in them at home against Jacksonville. Gardner Minshew doesn't tend to throw a deep ball that often. That should increase the floor for this defense. And we also know that the Jaguars can occasionally give up on games and mail it in and turn the ball over too. So I think that this pairing makes a lot of sense. I think that Freeman is the more attractive part of this one. But if he does well, the defense should do well too. So I think it makes sense to pair them together in tournaments as well.
There you go. The options for this stack, well, endless. Cash games, tournaments, do what you got to do. Devonta Freeman and the Falcons in a good spot, like Jim mentioned, with a spread, according to the FanDuel Sportsbook, has gone up over the last couple of days. The Falcons have played better, having the big win in San Francisco last week. You know, this may be the end of the Dan Quinn era, but his team is playing hard for him, and that includes Devonta Freeman, who even found the end zone a couple of weeks back. How about that? Devonta Freeman and the Falcons defense, a fine stack choice on Sunday. Our final stack is a game that, well, doesn't really mean much of anything. It's Denver and the Detroit Lions, and you're going with the home team. It's Drew Lock paired with his buddy Courtland Sutton. It didn't work in the snow in Kansas City. Why will it work now at home against Detroit?
Because they're at home against Detroit. I always want to go at this Detroit Lions defense with the way they've played, especially since the Quandre Diggs trade. This defense has been really bad. They now rank 26th against the pass for the full season based on number fires metrics. And yeah, Drew Lock was not good against Kansas City. And I'm not going to blame that on the snow, because Patrick Mahomes played really well in that game. Drew Lock does not get a pass because of the snow there, but he can get a pass because of the matchup. The Chiefs actually rank 5th against the pass this year based on number fires metrics, whereas again, the Lions are 26th. So you put Lock at home against a bad pass defense and good things can happen. He tore up the Texans. The Texans have been a better pass defense this year than the Lions. They rank 22nd against the pass. So I think that Drew Lock, his efficiency is not going to be where it was those first two games against the Chargers and the Texans, but it doesn't have to be. He has still been an improvement over Brandon Allen and Joe Flacco, which is great for Courtland Sutton. He is $7,100. He has had 70 or more receiving yards in 2 of Lock's 3 starts so far this year, despite facing Casey Hayward in one of those games, which makes me feel better about him seeing Darius Slay this weekend. Even in that game against Hayward, Sutton was really good. He had a couple of touchdowns there in the 3 games Lock has started. We see Sutton with 24% of the team's overall targets and 33% of the deep targets. So he's getting a lot of work. He's getting high leverage work. He is converting that into yardage. And I think that bodes well for him here at $7,100 in a spot where I wouldn't expect all that many people to go his way, given how bad the total is for this game. I think that should help us get Drew Lock and Courtland Sutton at a bit lower ownership. And given what they showed those first 2 games, I am inclined to take advantage of that. Lock has been a definitive upgrade over the other guys at quarterback here for the Broncos. That's good for Sutton, but it's also good for Drew Lock in a plus matchup at home. So disappointing output last week. Can't make too many excuses for that one outside of the matchup, but it's a much better spot this time. And I want to go back to Lock and Sutton with that situation being a lot better.
The weather's certainly going to be better. The defense certainly going to be worse. That's what's good for Denver and Drew Lock and Courtland Sutton. Hopefully taking advantage of Detroit's weak secondary. We've taken advantage of them before. We're in a good spot here this week. And you're right, not a lot of people are going to go there. So in a tournament, it's sneaky and hopefully productive for you. In a game, not a lot of people are going to be targeting. Drew Lock and Courtland Sutton, our final stack here of the week. But not the final time we're talking DFS. We're going to do it again tomorrow with some of the undervalued and overlooked players for this week. Want to give us a preview here, Jim?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure. But I think that there is a very interesting wide receiver in Christian Kirk who has not been that kind to us recently. But Greg, we're going to go back to the well tomorrow. Why not give it one more try once again?
Why not? One more time with Christian Kirk. For Jim Sannes, I am Greg Sussman. Thanks so much for watching the FanDuel Hurry Up. Have a great night, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.